Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Neil Rose. I'm the editor of Legal Futures. Welcome to this webinar in association with First for Lawyers. I'm just writing down those results that you can see in front of you. Best way of doing it. Right. So a couple of housekeeping things first. Obviously, you can remove the poll from the your screen by just pressing the close or the X at the top. If you are going to pose questions either during the Q&A or during the main presentation, can you use the Q&A box rather than the chat facility? Obviously, you can chat within that. There will be a link to the report in the chat, and we'll send it to you at the end of the webinar as well. Yeah, in advance of this webinar, I was thinking back when I was at law school in the early 90s and then became a legal journalist after qualifying in 1995. I don't think anyone really talked about client care, let alone customer service. Clients just were grateful for the advice they were given. And they certainly didn't talk about marketing and advertising and all these things. But obviously how times have changed. It's hard to run a modern law firm now without considering the customer experience, routes to market, digital engagement and the rest. And that brings us to today's discussion, essentially, I think, on the virtuous circle of keeping clients happy so that they post positive reviews on Trustpilot, Google Review Solicitors and the rest, and thus encourage new clients to get in touch with you. The last 18 months, of course, have accelerated the importance of digital marketing, while the regulators are all over the profession in terms of encouraging customer reviews as part of the push to make it easier for would-be clients to shop around for a lawyer. So that's why we put that poll up. Interesting results. So 38% said they are investing in customer service training. 24% said they weren't at the moment, but are planning to. So that is 62% who have customer training very much on their minds. So the new report from First for Lawyers that you are the first to see today couldn't be more timely. The next hour, we're going to be online for about an hour. We're going to start with Andy Cullick, Head of Marketing at First for Lawyers, talking through customer satisfaction and the main findings of the report, and we'll then have an expert panel to discuss them further. That's enough from me for the time being. So I will disappear from the screen and I will ask Andy to start talking. Andy.
Thank you, Neil. Good morning. Welcome, everybody. As he said, I'm here to talk about customer service and the results of our white paper, and simply asking the question, are you making your customers happy? Next screen, please. Today marks the launch of our 7th white paper, and in it we've been really focusing on customer service and how law firms look at customer service. And positively, we can see some good improvements that have been going on where 41% of firms think the customer service is as important as the legal matter itself. I'm not really going to major on that. 56% of firms have mapped out their customer journey and their interactions. Again, this isn't going to be in my discussion too much this morning, or the amount of training that is given. One of the key stats that has jumped out is this sort of rise in customers using review sites and customer satisfaction reports that are out there. And this is sort of played out in our research, which has identified that 160% rise in the number of consumers using the platform Review Solicitors. But that's not what actually I'm going to talk about. And if we go to the next slide, I'm going to be talking about buying cars. So, did you enjoy buying your last car? I don't mean the excitement of getting a car, that new car smell that's unique for the first few days, or the new gadgets and toys and getting out in it. I mean, this next experience on this next slide, the actual engagement with the car dealer. We've all come across them, the ones that be slightly over attentive, following you around, wanting to show you the cars they want to sell. The sarcastic ones, when I once mentioned that I was just there, just looking, so they had a special room for that. And then the know-it-alls. One time I was looking for a diesel, yes, days before diesel was evil, and the dealer scoffed at me, diesel, why do you want a diesel? Then I explained I was doing an average of 30,000 miles a year, and he agreed it was a very good, fine choice. And let me show me to the nearest cars that he had, but all he saw was the back of my head leaving the dealership. Next slide, please. Now, I imagine most of you, like me, have probably had the quandary of two cars, one big car sat on your drive, doing very little over the COVID pandemic, and this was the same in our household. So we plumped to take the decision to downsize to just one vehicle. But then, if we go to the next slide, this little man arrived in our lives, and we started going out places looking a bit like this, and realised the car that we had kept was probably too small. So we went on the search for a new family car. Next slide, please. Now, most of you are probably thinking, oh, have I come to the wrong presentation? This is about law. What on earth are we talking about buying a car for? But there's a really good, valid point to this. I just want to, the story I'm trying to tell you is about how buying behaviours and buying habits have changed. And I'd like you to think through this about how customers interact with your law firm when I'm using this as a slightly different example. So if we go to the next slide. The Corwick family buying process. Well, I'm a marketeer, so you're going to expect lots of initial desktop research is going to be done to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. Supported by some good field research, get out there, kick a few tyres. And in between all that, there was a fair spattering of procrastination as we tried to decide which car we were looking for. But next slide, please. The first thing I did with the initial research was get out there and use some different resources to try and find what car it was I was looking for. Putting in the metrics around performance, boot size, all those really exciting things, and how much I was going to spend on the car, and did I want to buy a new one or a second-hand one. And you go to things like Parker's and What Car. Go to the next slide, please. They've got some really useful comparators and comparisons in there. But what at the heart of it really helped me as a non-petrol head were reviews. And these were reviews from other owners of vehicles that I was looking at. And they were rating different elements of the quality of those cars. And that really just helped me in the first instance identify the type of car that I wanted to buy and thought was going to be right for me. And if we go to the next slide. The next challenge I have is where to buy from. Now, I have this natural fear of car dealers and might go in with 5 fingers on one hand and come out with 3. So I wanted some assurances about the places I was going to go to, that they were going to give me the right levels of customer service. I wasn't going to get sold a lemon, and I wanted to buy from them. So I needed to know they had the stock, but also were going to deliver for me. Now, up until now, I've not yet actually spoken to someone selling a car or a car retailer or stepped foot inside a car retailer. So my journey is very much outside of the natural ecosystem where they'd be able to sell to me. And this continued because if we go to the next slide, I then utilised resources such as Auto Trader and motors.co.uk to go and actually shortlist down the vehicles that I was interested in. Again, I'm not inside any particular dealer's websites. I'm well away from them. They're unable to market to me. If we go to the next screen, this then narrowed down the choices, and I could choose based on price, features, and models. But actually, what actually started being a really useful thing for me was star ratings. So if you see on availablecar.com, they're circled here, they have a review rating of 4.9. We go to the next screen. When you dig deeper into the full details, actually what you start getting more there is more owner reviews about how that vehicle performs. But what I was really looking for now was about the dealership. I wanted some comfort that they were the right people to go and buy a car from. And as you can see here, they've got just under 2,000 customer reviews. It's been underpinned by Trustpilot, which is an independent customer review service. So it felt clean, clear, transparent, and I got a really good understanding of what this particular dealer was like and whether it was one I would want to interact with. We go to the next screen. You'll see on the same page of results that have come in back, there are a couple of other dealers in there. One hasn't got any reviews at all, and the other's actually only got a handful of reviews, a slightly lower score. But again, they're not necessarily sending out the trust signals that made me comfortable to want to go and approach them. Probably perfectly good dealerships, very reasonable, very reputable, but actually they weren't utilising the real estate here to sell those messages to me. So if we go to the next screen, After going through this process, I probably narrowed it down to 2 or 3 cars that I really sort of were interested in. And again, the dealer hadn't sold me a vehicle, but I had gone out and done the research that I needed based around specification, price, and more importantly, the rating of the vendor, in this case, through star ratings that were on offer through Trustpilot. I then pinged out through Auto Trader 2 or 3 requests for test drives, and actually became a bit of a speed is the essence. The first person that got back to me was the one that I booked a test drive with. I went to see them. I was happy with the vehicle that was on offer, was happy with the deal that was on offer, and I bought the vehicle off them with the usual conversations around, would you like gap insurance? Would you like your paints polishing with this special metallic paint protection that you normally get from these? And next screen, please. So why did I buy from where I bought? Well, yes, the car was the right car in the end for me, but there were probably several right cars out there. The reality is they responded quickest to my initial inquiry. They let me drive the car for an hour with no one else in it. They were just me, so there was no pressure on the sale at all. But actually, importantly, the reviews were the integral part of the journey at the start. They made me feel confident in their abilities, their ability to service and their aftercare skills, and it gave me the connection and comfort that I wanted to do business with them before I even set foot in the vehicle. It may not have been that vehicle, I might have ended up looking at other ones, but reviews played an important part of the whole process. Next screen, please. So actually, how does this tie back into what we're talking about today in the launch of our white paper? Go to the next slide. Really is the importance of online customer reviews. This is a new phenomenon that's grown quite rapidly over the last few years. Are you making your customers happy? And if so, are you utilising this information to market yourself and your business more effectively? And this is where our white paper comes into the results. Next slide, please. Equally, 80%, our white paper research showed that 80% of consumers felt reputation was one of the most important factors when looking for law firms. And our law firms that we interviewed came back and said they do actually actively seek reviews from their clients. However, only half have a systematic and formalised process in place, and 1 in 10 are actually using an external outsourced feedback service, such as Trustpilot or Google Reviews, to actually seek client satisfaction in a proactive manner. And this is further reinforced by our survey about how, and if we go to the next slide, please, how people respond to these reviews. Not only are they asking for reviews, but we're finding there's probably a mixed bag in terms of how often they respond to reviews, mostly when it's negative, mainly on an ad hoc basis, but very rarely do people respond to all reviews that are given. Next slide. I went on to do a bit more research about this, and we looked at 35 firms out there, which included the top 10 legal websites and the next 25 or so top spending firms that are spending the most online. And actually 74% were collecting reviews. When we started drilling down and trying to look at it to see how many of those were collecting them on a proactive basis, i.e. they had a full account on Trustpilot or had more than 100 reviews on the likes of Google and other review services, we found that actually only 40% were proactive in the collection of reviews. And then even less, half of those, or 20% of the total, were actually then utilising their reviews within the website. Some may have had just a link, others actually had customer reviews embedded there in their homepage to really showcase what they were talking about. And also around half of the firms that we reviewed were actually responding to any form of review. And this is probably at the detriment to some of those, because those that were doing it well were responding to a mixture of the positive and negative reviews. We get both, not shy away, we are going to get negative reviews in the industry. It's a natural part of life. But there were quite a few firms that weren't responding to reviews at all. So if someone's posted a negative review, that's chipping away at your reputation, and it's important that you get on top of that. And we can see there's obviously an escalation in the number of reviews that are being given, because when we did the analysis, nearly 70,000 Trustpilot reviews across these 26 firms. However, I have to say that 3 of the firms that counted quite a lot of these, and Google's probably a little bit on a much lower side of less than 4,000, but they're becoming increasingly important, increasingly popular to firms. Next slide, please. Now, this trust and reputation isn't just about buying a car, in the example that I've used. It's about more ingrained in our lives. It's there, it sits in the way we engage with brands, how we buy from firms, so it'd be products or services, that they're all around us. And actually, because COVID has driven more people online into more online services, it's accelerating the importance of them. And don't just take my word for it. Actually, if we look at the next few slides, and next slide, please, we can see it's there in everything we do. Does anyone remember what our going on a holiday is? But here we are, TUI's website. You've got TripAdvisor embedded in the research results, showing how people view this particular resort. And who else out there doesn't do this? When you go looking for a hotel for the night, you go and have a look at TripAdvisor before you make that booking, just to see what other people are saying. And if we go to the next slide, it's become an integral part of the retail ecosystem out there and platforms. AO and Amazon, 2 big online websites that have grown exponentially over the last few years. Again, you can see star ratings, and you click through to them, you've got the customer reviews and the insights, and they help you make your own purchasing decisions about those organisations and the products and services they're selling. Even our supermarkets are at it. Go to the next slide. This is an example from Morrison's, where they're asking customers to rate the products and they're buying. So this is their bread page, and all these products with stars on customers have taken the time to rate the quality of their bread. So if you think your lunchtime sandwich is really important to you and you want to make sure you're getting the right bread choice, go and buy from Morrison's, and you can actually see what other people think about it. Slightly flippant to note, but actually this just shows how important reviews are becoming to the way we do business and the way consumers buy from us. Next slide, please. Our white paper doesn't just cover the direct bits on customer service. We've also gone into a few bits of information around key things that the industry are being pushed down the road of, which is the likes of having comparison websites, the encouragement that the LSB wants us to shop around and have price transparency when it comes to engaging with consumers. So we talk a little bit more about that. And how this plays out across our industry as well. Now, there's a reason I chose buying a car as an example. If we go to the next slide, I actually worked in the automotive sector, not car dealerships, I have to say, for a number of years before working in the legal sector. And there are a number of synergies between car dealers and lawyers and the way they have their structure and their mindset. Car dealers are generally independent regional players, reliant very much on physical locations. They have a sort of a mindset where they're probably slow adopters to online, but certainly in terms of car dealers, there's never any belief that you could sell a car over the internet. It needed to be a physical transaction. You had to go to a dealership and buy from it. They just certainly said they couldn't possibly sell to somebody over the internet. It just wasn't possible. And they often feel like they're probably being forced down a journey a bit of innovation that they don't necessarily want to embrace all the time. And if we go to the next screen, but this world is changing for them. They have comparison websites. When we think of a comparison website, we probably think of Compare the Market or something like that, where we buy our utilities, and gas and electricity. But the likes of Motors and Auto Trader are comparison websites. They take consumers away from the dealership and actually start the customer journey for them. So it's as important that they're on those sites and they're making the most of those sites to showcase and sell themselves. And car dealers are not fans of the likes of Auto Trader, but feel it's an absolute necessity for them as well. But if we go to the next slide, we'll see that actually the online retail proposition has changed massively in the last 18 months. Kazoo and Cinch have arrived, and if you haven't seen them yet or seen their advertising, you've probably living in a cave for the last 18 months because they're sponsoring absolutely everything. But these are massive propositions, which quite simply are enabling consumers to find and buy online. The car is delivered to your door, and if you don't like it, you send the car back. You have a 14-day money-back guarantee, no quibbles, no questions, you just send it back. And they've built websites that go to the nth degree of detail. This is just a small screenshot here where it shows a dent inside a door sill, just to show that you know what you're getting. And this has massively changed the proposition. And next screen, please. Given a point of difference that's put them on the front foot, you know, no doubt helped by COVID, about how they can sell vehicles. And they've been accelerating their reputation by focusing on convenience, quality, but also customer experience and convenience, and showcasing the reviews. You know, between the main three new players that have come to market, they've got about 30,000 customer reviews produced in the space of about 12 months. So they've seen the importance of that to get their message across. And dealers are reacting to it. They're playing catch up. They're chasing after them. You're seeing a lot more now where main dealers are actually starting to sell on the same proposition. And so it's not a fully unique proposition, but they're having to play a catch-up game, because the likes of Cazoo are selling 30 to 40,000 vehicles a year, which is the size of a fairly decent dealer group. So they are making an impact. And this ultimately actually means that buying habits are changing. This is a reflection of how we as consumers now interact and buy from organisations, and will change forever, which will have an impact on the way we need to do business now and in the future. So could this happen in the legal sector? Are too many people waiting to see what happens and playing catch up? Next slide, please. Well, the reality is, you know, I've talked previously in presentations, if an Amazon law appeared in this world, or we start suddenly seeing a big investment in private equity into a law firm, such as Cazoo has had, or mergers and consolidation that's happening quite a lot across the industry, then we're probably going to see massive changes in the way the legal sector is interacting with customers and bringing innovation. And it doesn't matter that, you know, law is a service and not necessarily a product. The reality is life has changed. If we go to the next screen, we can see that these days, it's not just about the 4 Ps of place, price, and product. You know, when we're looking at my examples of a car, they may have had the right stock for me, but I didn't set out to use the dealer that I did. I actually started my customer journey on a different route. I was looking for trust signals. I was using third parties to try and find them. And when I got the right ones, I then started engaging in the brand. And it was as important that they had the service standards to be able to support what they were presenting and driving forward. So if we can next slide, please. My questions to you are you making your customers happy? If so, are you effectively recording that, sharing those successes to be able to recruit new customers in the future? Thank you very much. The final screen. Hopefully that all made sense. The white paper is now alive. I saw a link pop up on the chat for you to be able to go and download it and read at your pleasure. Please do stay with us. We're going to open up now to the panel to discuss these points a little bit more. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. While our other panelists unmask themselves, we're just going to put another poll up very quickly. There we go. So are you spending more on marketing now than you were pre-pandemic? While we're waiting for the results, so our panel today is made up of Matthew Maxwell Scott, who you may well know, the Executive Director of the Association of Consumer Support Organisations, Isabel Rimmer, who's a specialist in business performance and will give us a nice perspective from someone who's not as involved in the legal market as all of us, the rest of us are. Helen Labozzo from Taylor Rose MW. She's a bit of a poster girl for online reviews and modern marketing methods, which is why I keep coming back to you, Helen. And Nick Delaney, who the head of business development at First for Lawyers. Can we have the results? There we go. So fairly split. on that, but a reasonable number who are spending more. Right, so let's crack on. I'll start maybe, Matthew, start with just any kind of initial impressions from the report that jumped out to you.
Yeah, it's hugely interesting. I think it's hugely commendable as well that First for Lawyers has done this 7 times now. So congratulations to them on a really interesting and thoughtful report. And I know it also takes a lot of human and financial resource as well, and working with IRN research, which, like First for Lawyers, is an AXA member. So it's high quality stuff. Yeah, it's tricky, this, isn't it? Because especially with legal services, we try and compare ourselves and broader legal services sector to other sectors. It's not easy to do. So you have to look for the areas where you can draw help.
You are breaking up there. You're breaking up there a bit, Matthew. Okay, but maybe Matthew, we'll come back to you. Hopefully your connection will improve. Helen, maybe you can jump in and give me your initial thoughts.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having us. So I think, having a read of the white paper, the main part that kind of resonated with me was how reviews kind of really give you a full flavour of the legal business that you're either about to engage with or are engaging with. I think it's really important for clients and customers to see how lawyers respond to that kind of general customer feedback that perhaps feels a little bit alien to them. I mean, lawyers are good at being lawyers, right? And we're heavily invested in getting the legal work done, but sometimes it's easy to forget about the actual customer service element. And I think it's really reassuring for clients to be able to see how law firms might be engaging and considering the impact of that on their business, as well as the actual legal work itself.
Thank you. Matthew, do you want to have another go?
Can you hear me okay this time?
Hopefully. Yeah. So we heard your the start, and then
I went away. No, I was going to say, it's interesting, isn't it, that how the regulators think we should be more like other sectors and use digital comparison tools.
Okay.
Obviously, no one actually uses the expression digital comparison.
Okay. So Matthew, this is not working brilliantly. Okay. I'm going to move on to, because we are losing you again, Matthew. One of the issues with I'm going to point this at Isabel. One of the issues with introducing modern techniques or methods in law firms is they can be quite traditional, shall we say, and they don't necessarily want to embrace such kind of methods that you may see in supermarkets and indulge in, like Andy was showing. So how do you persuade senior management of the need to focus on customer experience? You're on mute. Someone had to be.
Okay, we're now.
Right.
So, well, I think some of the things that stood out for me, and I think, how do we persuade people to invest, which is what really we're talking about, how do we persuade people to invest in these things? There are a few comments that came out of the white paper, which I thought were really interesting. One was from Paul Rumley, and he said, the first impression we give is crucial, because if we don't get it right, then we don't get the client or the customer. But also the other one was, to bring in new work, you need to show you've done a great job for existing clients. So I think what we've got to start thinking about is, actually, in order to grow the revenue, we've got to do some things a little bit differently. And very often when we're working with clients and talking about change, what we say is that we're not saying you're going to throw everything out and start again. You're going to keep some things. You're going to keep some things that work really well. But you're going to get rid of some things that perhaps haven't been working quite so well, and then need to add in some new things and to change some things. And from my perspective, I think the more we can link the customer experience to growth in revenue, and in my experience of working with partnerships and law firms, is that the more we can connect that onto the radar of the partners in terms of growth from revenue and increased utilization of professional services, it kind of becomes a bit of a no-brainer. But you've got to make that investment to start with. But I think if we can make that connection and show that by doing these things a little bit differently, we can grow revenue, then it will work.
Nick, you talk to lawyers on a daily basis. It's just that does need a bit of a mindset change, isn't it? Because clients used to be seen and not heard, if you like.
Yeah, and it follows on from what Izzy was saying there, is law firms quite rightly spend a lot of money getting the right lawyers and making sure that they can carry out their legal duties to the correct level. The problem we've got is unless the customer connects with the law firm, the customer doesn't get anywhere near those lawyers. And Andy pointed it out in his presentation. In terms of doing the research into his car, he was connected to the process. So a potential consumer can go out there, they can go and look at the review sites, they can do their research and decide that I want to speak to law firm X. They pick up the phone to law firm X, and if the experience they have in that first phone call is not a good experience, an experience that they connect with the law firm, then that consumer doesn't get anywhere near the lawyers. You've lost that business. I think it's a well-known kind of a research point in business is that you've got about 7 seconds to make the first impression on someone. And from that 7 seconds, about 60% is visual. Well, you've got people ringing you up, so you haven't got that visual connection. You've got the sound of your voice and what you say to the consumer. So there has to be a mindset change in the investment in the technical aspects of doing the job, and the organization, the law firm, great. But you've also got to invest in the people right at the front of the law firm, the receptionist, the switchboard, the new client team. If you invest your money there, then you've got more chance of that consumer getting through to your lawyers. So it is all about that connectivity.
Helen, how easy has it been for you to build that? I mean, it's very striking that one of the most striking findings of the survey was how many firms now recognise that they consider the customer experience just as important as actually the legal advice. Now, obviously, ultimately, you've got to give the right legal advice, but you won't necessarily get that far if you haven't got clients who are happy with how it's being delivered.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we've spent a long time trying to nurture some of that process. We've invested in a communications support team who effectively handle the front end of that communication. So they are our representatives for the brand, if you like, and we're really heavy in how they should present themselves and speak to the client and give out what we want the client to hear, essentially, and connect with them. And they're obviously trained in a communication way to do that. It's one of those things. You have to, I don't see how you can not invest in that in this day and age, because there's so much out there. Reviews are there whether you choose to engage with them or not. As a firm, we've chosen to engage with them, and we actually do quite a lot proactively off the back of that internally as well. And actually, I think one of the pluses for doing so is it really gives you kind of senior managers and board members the eyes and ears of what's actually happening on the ground. So we're kind of collectors of that information and really experience firsthand of what that client's experience with us, on every level is.
I think I saw on LinkedIn the other day, or yesterday, that someone was thrilled because their secretary, their receptionist got mentioned in the Legal 500.
Amazing.
Which is quite pretty amazing. So Matthew, let's have another go.
Third time
because you seem to be moving okay in the box, but then it's when you start talking.
It's a good sign.
The time stops.
I've done a speed test, and apparently I'm all right now.
Right,
So
okay.
I'm sorry about that. Blame the Virgin. No, I look really interesting point, and just to build on them, I think communication is a huge part of this. Obviously, at the first point, just like Nick said about when people first get in touch, but I think throughout any legal process, one of the problems, and this is something that Isabel really was drawing on, is about unmet legal need, and how do we, as a sector, make sure that more people are making use of legal services when they need them. And cost is obviously perceived to be a huge barrier. But actually, it's not just the sort of main ticket price. And obviously, it's quite difficult to know what a lot of legal services will cost. It's how the growing costs or changing costs are communicated throughout a process, and the rather nasty taste it might leave in the mouth when the unexpected happens or when things unexpectedly go up. So I think that's a really, really important thing for us to bear in mind. And I don't think it's a question, I was trying to say this when I kept being cut off by the powers that be, about digital comparison tools, which I think is an expression that nobody uses, but there we go. We all know what compare the market is, you know. I just don't think it's very instructive or helpful in legal services. I mean, and if you look at the compare the market model, it was born out of the fact that insurers were behaving in a certain way towards new customers compared to existing customers. That changes in the beginning of next year anyway, and that model, therefore, will cease to be quite as helpful. So I think we need to look at different ways. And the problem there is there are so many myriad different ways. And clearly, word of mouth and personal recommendation will still be absolutely vital. Clearly, for those who are making a distress purchase, and there I'm looking particularly at personal injury because that's the most relevant here, they're not going to shop around. And the statistics in the excellent report bear this out. It's not something people shop around with. So you have to think of other ways during the process to kind of build that satisfaction that you then hope will have a knock-on effect in terms of personal recommendations and online reviews at the end of any legal process.
It's worth making clear that the enthusiasm for digital comparison tools among the regulators is driven by that. Well, they've dealt with service and price transparency, and now it's about quality, and it's very hard to find proxies for quality, and they're putting a lot of eggs in that particular basket. But let's move on to maybe Andy, I'll bring you back here about where the areas you find that firms often fall down with when they're dealing with prospective clients and indeed once they've been instructed. Maybe people should just read the last 6 white papers because we've done a lot on that.
I think when we're looking at customer service, it's actually managing expectations is probably the biggest thing. And I think if you look at complaints, if you look at the poorer quality reviews that people leave, it's where firms, it's not necessarily about the advice. These things can get separated. It's more about complaints about, well, do you know what, I've not heard from you for weeks or months. And not actually explaining to customers the process that's involved in what might be a particularly around personal injury. It takes time, and explaining it or giving some way of keeping somebody up to date. And I think you'll see the biggest frustrations are where people are complaining, and I've not heard from my fee earner, my case handler, I've not heard from the organisation. They don't think the lawyer's doing anything on their behalf. But I think some interesting points have been raised by everybody on the panel, and Nick talking about that first 7 seconds, that first interaction on the phone. Actually, before that, how many firms are losing business because people are not getting to the phone, because the reviews aren't being followed up, the reviews aren't being looked at, people aren't using reviews, they're not sending the signals out to make them want to pick up the phone to that firm. If you go and do a search online, you see these days that most people do their research on the internet. It's the natural thing. You go straight there. Most people go there. And automatically you search something like no window fee solicitors. The results come back. You'll see embedded in those results are ratings for different law firms and lawyers out there. And if you're not showing yours or you've got a poor rating, then people are just going to potentially pass you by. And that's one of the things that jumps out to me as probably one of the bigger challenges for law firms. Why should they be embracing this process? Because it's an integral part of how you market yourself.
The question came in for Helen. I think Isabel, you maybe have something to say on this as well. If you see, it's actually in the chat. How do senior managers and board members act differently as a result of being able to see what's happening on the ground? Does it change their leadership priorities, investment, etc.? Helen, how granular does the management go into what they find out?
Yeah, quite detailed actually. So we produce some insightful information on a monthly basis at the moment, and do direct comparisons with the prior months. So we tend to look at what's happened over the previous 12 months and do direct comparisons on certain metrics. One of those being the reviews. We have started to look at things like word clouds to try and create a bit of visibility. What's the most regular word that people are saying about us, both on a positive and negative nature. We're also looking at the reviews and the scoring in terms of location and trying to understand that journey on a regular basis. That helps us hone into kind of something that might be happening at a particular location. So it's, as I said before, it's kind of the information that we're giving back to the board and that we are measuring regularly from those reviews and everything else that we manage is really giving the board the eyes to be able to see it. So instead of them having to kind of ask lots of different people what's going on, they're getting these regular reports. It's measured in the same way. It's ever evolving and getting better, to be perfectly honest. And it is keeping their focus and their attention. And off the back of that, I know that they do approach individuals, departments. Okay, we've seen this. What's the trend? What are we experiencing? How can we change it? So that gives them the momentum to challenge kind of what's actually happening day in on the ground. Obviously, throughout the stamp duty position with property, we've had a lot of hype around that, and that is difficult for most law firms, I would imagine, to have to manoeuvre around that, and hopefully everyone will take a bit of a breath and can kind of move on. But we are literally measuring every discipline in terms of what complaints they're getting, what reviews they're getting, and really trying to use it and turn the business around.
Interesting. I mean, Isabel, is this changing the dynamics of management, having this access to this kind of information?
I think most definitely it is. And I think when you look at it from a commercial perspective, so if you think about all the experience that you might have at senior level, partner level, leadership boards, how do we take that knowledge and that experience and make it more accessible to people who are working at the front line? So if you've got customer coordinators or customer service people taking incoming queries, how do you make sure that all that knowledge and experience can be available to those frontline people? And what we're seeing with some of our clients in professional services, not just within the legal sector, but more broadly, is that they're getting actively involved in creating sort of like portfolios of stories and case studies and use cases and experiences and citations, and then using those to help people at the front line, because they realize that they know all this stuff because they've been doing it for 10, 15, 20 years, but their frontline people don't. And I think one of the challenges we have in any of these situations is that somebody coming to a law firm, whether it's a personal injury case or whatever, they're not doing that every day. They may be doing it even just once in a lifetime. But the person at the other end, the professional services person, they're dealing with that day in, day out. So somehow we've got to kind of balance that up. And I think when senior leadership teams really appreciate that and start to put in place internal training, service training, using those amazing stories and citations, it makes the frontline much more confident and competent, but it also means you get a much better level of service and you grow the revenue. So I think there's some great things to be done there, and some really interesting work that you're doing, Helen, as well, which I think is fascinating.
If I can just jump in there, following on from Izzy, there's quite an interesting report that AXO have just published as well in relation to the legal services industry and the difficulties that the consumer has in actually understanding the law at all. And there was some quite staggering statistics in there in terms of the number of people that don't know the difference between the criminal system and the civil system. But one thing the report did focus on was also trusting or faith in corporations. And actually, people tend to have less faith in corporations around finance and insurance, etc. But actually, lawyers come out quite well in that the consumer actually has faith in that they get good advice or good support from the legal fraternity, almost to the same degree as something like the Citizens Advice Bureau. So there's a great opportunity there because lawyers are actually, and law firms are actually held in quite good stead by the consumer. So again, it's about getting those experiences and good experiences out in front of the consumer to show the consumer that actually, yeah, you're a good law firm, you've had some great results and you've got some really happy customers.
I mean, Matthew, can you expand a little bit on this research? I'm not sure I've seen
Yeah,
it.
I mean, actually, it builds on research you've seen quite a lot over the years. There's the trust barometers and things that come out every year, and they show different professions by how much they're trusted. And it's at the bottom, it's always politicians, tabloid journalists, not trade journalists, I should know, and business leaders. It's the unholy trinity, I think, as I've always called it. And at the top are doctors and nurses. And then teachers, but yeah, solicitors, and people don't distinguish between solicitors and barristers. We shouldn't expect them to. So it's generally solicitors anyway. They're not bad. They're kind of Everton, you know. They're never in danger of relegation. They don't really win much, but they're doing okay. But I think just actually to build on what Isabel was saying about that point of contact and frontline staff, and something we're looking more about is about vulnerability, which I think gets overused because the FCA definition of vulnerability includes potential vulnerability, which is basically everyone. But we have to think about when people are getting in touch with law firms because of a distress situation, personal injury, probate, family, they are then probably vulnerable because of that situation. And it's whether or not we're giving the right advice to them, the right training to frontline staff to how to identify this, a very difficult point in their lives. And again, experienced solicitors who've dealt with these sorts of clients over perhaps decades are probably just naturally really good at their bedside manner, as it were. But we can't necessarily expect call handlers and things to have the same. So it's a challenge. It's a training challenge. But back to that unmet legal needs point, you know, that's that's how to get through it. Is if you can make people immediately feel more comfortable with the process and with the personalities involved, they're more likely, therefore, perhaps to actually use legal services to resolve their problems, which will then improve that trust in solicitors and the reputation of the sector.
Yeah, I mean, unmet legal need is a big issue that we don't think we're going to solve in the next 10 minutes. Nick, is one issue that it strikes me that there are a lot of things you can do, and a large firm with good resources like Taylor Rose can maybe afford to have big contact centres and all the technology and open late and even work on Saturdays. What can a smaller firm that may think this is just a little bit too much, and I don't know where to start, or can't afford to do it, I can't afford to monitor 24 comparison sites and all that. Where do you start if you haven't got a large pot of resources?
Well, a small firm can still open on Saturdays. That's not a problem. And in fact, a lot of the small firms out there, there's a lot of people setting up new law firms who are very entrepreneurial and are very good at getting onto social media. They're open on Saturdays or Sundays because they'll take a call on the mobile. You know, they'll respond to the consumer when the consumer wants to be responded to. So I don't think size is a major impediment. I think size sometimes can be a challenge in its own right. And again, that comes back to where customer reviews can be beneficial, because if you're trying to say to the consumer, I've got 20 different disciplines that I can do in my law firm, from military claims to child abuse to divorce, etc. How do you spread your budget across all those different work disciplines? It's very difficult. Even if you've got a massive budget, you've still got to decide which one's going to get the best return on investment and allocate accordingly. So that's where, again, customer review sites can be very, very influential, because you can have some great reviews written about an element of your work stream that you really can't afford to spend a lot of money on marketing. You know, the customer reviews are doing it for you. So again, for a small firm, it's unfortunately, you know, rolling your sleeves up and getting stuck in and answering, you know, customer complaints, getting those reviews out there. And being a small firm gives you more opportunity to spend time talking to the consumer and talking to the customer and proactively being in touch with them. So I think in today's environment, particularly within personal injury and clinical negligence, etc., that we operate in, where costs are being, there's pressure on costs and revenue all the time. Being small and nimble is a pretty good place to be. Being a big firm is not always what it's made out to be. So
Okay.
There are opportunities.
The reality, Andy, of course, is that a lot of firms effectively delegate this to people like you to get the customers at least, not necessarily through the door, but at least with a foot over the threshold. So what is the online marketing environment like at the moment?
I think it feels like the rest of the world at the moment. Everything is more difficult, more expensive, and in shorter supply. We're still seeing the lag of people not being out and about as much, potentially in terms of search volumes. The impact of obviously the RTA reforms is a big one. So it's a challenging environment out there still from that perspective. As we've started seeing more people go back into work and more journeys increasing, that you are starting to see the things happen. But yeah, it's like preparing for Christmas. There's a slight shortage of stock in terms of what we would expect. So we're seeing increased pricing because more people are competing for a smaller pool of potential clients.
Right. Has the new official injury claim portal made a big difference to the way the market's operating?
No. consumers do not know. We are still seeing a big chunk of clients ringing us up about road traffic accidents that they've had, absolutely unaware that there are any reforms or any changes or there are any differentiations in terms of the amount of compensation they'll be able to claim through the process. No one knows of the portal, no one knows what it does, and they're being directed in the same place. And I can't say there's a massive desire for them wanting to go and do these things themselves. They've been. That's what law firms are. We're here for, to help them and support them down very complex routes. And as far as they're concerned, the portal is non-existent. Doesn't even, I don't think, come up in search results particularly well if you are searching for a road traffic accident support.
Really?
Does not appear. The government website tells you about how much lack of compensation is available for road traffic accidents, but in terms of the portal itself, it's non-existent and non-visible.
Yeah, I mean, Matthew, we get slightly off topic here, but the figures you're hearing is fewer than 10% of claimants are doing it themselves.
And also the volumes overall are at the moment dramatically below what you'd expect them to be, which doesn't mean accidents aren't happening, doesn't mean people don't have legitimate claims. They're just stuck in the kind of treacle of the OIC. So let's hope it improves, because it's not very fair on consumers otherwise.
They still haven't published any figures yet.
No, they said that's because the minister has changed,
Yeah,
but the minister hasn't changed. So wait and see. I think we thought after 4 months, 3 and 4 months, we'd know something. We don't yet, but
no.
Too soon to tell.
No. I just want to come back to that. I raised it obliquely, and you did address it, Nick. Maybe Helen, about out of hours operations and how important that is nowadays.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you've had so many people over the pandemic, kind of reevaluating their work-life balance, haven't you? So I think the question comes down to, do lawyers, are they prepared to do that? One thing I will say, we have, I'm sure you may or may not be aware, we have many consultants that are associated with us. And those alternative hours actually suit many of them in terms of going to meet people. And so I think it's a really individual thing. And again, it probably comes back to how you manage it. I mean, we also see people reaching out to us on social media channels with questions, and they tend to do that in evenings, weekends sometimes as well, and we monitor that. and manage that as best as we can. So yeah, I don't know really. Do I think that every lawyer is going to start opening over at the weekends? I'm not sure. I'm on the fence. I do think it will work for some, but maybe not everybody.
I mean, you're obviously, Taylor Rose is unusual in having such a large consultant operation sitting alongside a traditional law firm.
On that, Neil, the traditional reticence to experiment with kind of weekend opening was a fair point pre-pandemic, when somebody had to go into the office to open up and the system be activated, and necessarily depending on what level of employee you've got opening up on a Saturday or a Sunday, you need to have somebody more senior there to supervise, etc. So I think there were fair arguments about what's the rate of return we're going to get if we open up on a Saturday.
Do you know what? I mean, we actually did open on a Saturday for a while, a few years back, and actually it didn't really attract that many people, if I'm honest. We did that from a property perspective so that people could drop off things like identification, but again, we've kind of moved on a bit from that, haven't we? But yeah, it wasn't as fruitful as I would have expected to. So how that's changed now, and to be honest, we kind of dropped it because it just wasn't really worth us opening on a Saturday. I can't say whether that would be different now because we don't tend to do it, strictly speaking, but
it's just now post-COVID, well, still in COVID, but we've all been forced as an industry to learn to work from home. And to have access to the same tools you would have access to in the office from home. So there's certainly more opportunity for flexibility in terms of taking a call at the weekends or somebody being assigned to take calls at the weekends.
I mean, we even have the type of phone system that we have, which we've invested in. There's like a linked app that you can access on a mobile phone, so you can switch it on, switch it off. To your kind of availability. So potentially you wouldn't even necessarily need to be behind a laptop, I guess. That's how much technology has moved on in terms of the pandemic and being able to work remotely. And that's great for a lot of people that, want to be more fluid in their movement.
It's interesting because Elena's just commented on the chat that she opens at the weekends and it doesn't make a huge difference. She found that her clients also like their weekends and don't always want to talk to a solicitor. So it'll be interesting to see how it develops, because as Andy was talking about in his presentation, the Amazon law or the way in which consumers are researching and buying products has fundamentally changed. And it's, the tech guys don't like heavily regulated industries. So the chances of tech guys coming in to properly disrupt the legal industry is probably less of a threat than other industries because it's so heavily regulated. But they've changed the way people buy things. And so the legal industry has either got to get itself up to the same level as people buy products. Or people are going to determine that's the way they're going to go. So it's kind of either get with the program or eventually you're going to have to. And those that get with the program quicker, get the best shot.
I mean, we're coming to the end. Isabel, maybe you might have some thoughts on that now. This is a time then to really be focusing on how your business needs to be changing and having the skills in place to adapt to that.
Well, and just picking up on what people are saying about sort of different ways of working and that flexibility, and whether it's virtual or hybrid world or whatever we call it, it also means that you can do the training in very different ways as well. I mean, we ran our first in-person workshop, that's masterclass, back in August. That was the first one in 18 months. Everything else has been virtual, everything. And that means that you can do some really, really powerful training very cost effectively at times that work for the business. You don't need to take people into a meeting room and say, right, I'm going to do 2 days of customer service training or anything like that. You can do it modularly. You can do it over time. And that's what we were doing. Tonight I'm working with a US client, tomorrow it's Latin America, and I'm doing that from a base in France. We couldn't have done that. We couldn't have done that 18 months ago, 2 years ago. So I think we are changing, and I think if we embrace some of these new ways of working, and all the things that you've been talking about, Andy, and all the things that you're implementing, Helen, and everybody here today, it's about behaviours. It's about how we choose to behave, and all the things that we do here, we can teach people. We can teach them. It's about how they choose to behave. So I think the opportunity actually is there to really radically do things differently, and to really embrace this whole new way of working, which is quite exciting. And it might not mean we need to be open on a Saturday. Don't know.
On that very positive note, unless Andy, you have any final words you want to share?
Just on the debate about out of hours and weekends, I think to me it comes back to the point made earlier around being responsive to customers, and I think customers don't necessarily think and expect you to have a full functioning service on a Saturday, Sunday, or 8 o'clock at night. But if you respond and acknowledge their inquiry at that time, you are embracing them and you are potentially taking them out of the market. We've seen that. We've done our own experiments, our own data analysis of when leads come in and how quickly we respond to them and how we respond to them. It's the effectiveness of turning them into customers. And it's each to their own. Every business will find their own way forward in that. But we see it more. Amazon Prime, just like that, and unregulated and all that. If I can't get something tomorrow, I'm probably more upset and look elsewhere for it. We are probably becoming a less patient society after clapping for everybody 18 months ago. We've moved on. We demand everything now, especially if you look at some of my own son in his teens who's growing up. My other son who thinks everything arrives just instantly. We used to wait for the stuff, and the world is changing on that front.
Okay, I think that I will call it a day now. You can see there's a link in the chat to the report. We'll also send it out in a follow-up email. Can I thank everyone for attending? Can I thank our panelists for taking part and giving us their time? The next Legal Futures Conference is next month, our annual innovation conference. I urge you to have a look at that on our website in person, so you can actually touch people. It doesn't sound right, does it? But you know what I mean. Well, I thank you, and I no doubt we'll be here next year with the next First for Lawyers white paper. So we're going to end the webinar now. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day.
Great. Thanks, Neil.